Welcome to the Commercial Awareness Compass. This is your weekly guide to developing commercial insight that goes beyond just the headlines. Each week, we take a major story and break it down across 3 levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Our goal isn't just to inform you, but to help you build a commercial mindset. Whether you're new to commercial awareness or already have some understanding, we're here to help you move up a level each week. So follow along and use these insights in your applications, interviews, or even on the job. So my name is Daniel Shepherd. I'm a law student and a future trainee solicitor. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by Henry, a senior associate at Thrive Law, who has extensive experience in commercial contracts. Henry will guide us through today's story for today's session. Good morning, Henry. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm great. Thank you for coming down today. So this week's topic is Meta's decision to end its third-party fact-checking program in the United States and rely on users to flag misinformation. So this shift could have a major implication for content moderation globally, and particularly in different platforms as they navigate changes in the UK and the US. So today's session, that's what we're going to explore. So as a guideline for viewers today, as we go through the beginning, intermediate, and advanced levels, I encourage you to notice how each explanation builds on the last. At the beginner level, we'll start with the basics of what's happening and why it matters. At the intermediate level, we'll connect this issue to its broader impact on businesses and industries. And finally, at the advanced level, we'll dive into the strategic thinking that law firms use to help clients navigate complex challenges. So with that introduction, let's get started. So Henry, let's start with the basics. Could you explain Meta's decision to someone who's new to commercial awareness and why the story is significant and what it means for misinformation to be managed online?
Yeah, for sure. So as you kindly set out down that Meta has decided to opt against using third-party fact-checking software and platforms that can essentially, if there's misinformation online, these platforms can flag it and take it down and mark it as not correct. Meta has decided actually we don't want to use that. We want to rely on our users, say you and me, to see if something's on the internet, we can flag that as misinformation, which obviously comes at a huge risk, because who are we to know what's sort of true and false when there's so much sort of information being posted online. So as you mentioned, that has a huge number of sort of ramifications from a misinformation perspective, but also from, if we take this from a sort of basic level, from a client's perspective. Say, for example, you're a firm advising a client, you're a UK firm, but you also have a client who's based in the UK, but operates in the US and also the EU. You then have a number of different regulatory remits that client needs to comply with. And we've got the US, as we're seeing, pushing a stronger emphasis on what they deem as free expression, but sort of at what risk does that come?
So what was the initial decision making for Meta behind this decision, and how does it change the way that they approach misinformation?
I think ultimately the decision making around it, I think, is very much an internal politics thing. And if we just look at sort of geopolitical landscape right now, if we take a look at Donald Trump being recently elected, we see Zuckerberg and just these kind of US tech giants in that whole sphere. That's having a huge impact on decisions that are being made right now. And we're kind of seeing that unfold in front of our eyes, And I think the impact that that's going to have on misinformation is, I think there's a real risk that there's going to be a lot more information shared that isn't actually sort of factually correct. And of course, these platforms, the internet where information is pushed out, it's largely tailored to what we see and what our interests are, the type of people we interact with. So say, for example, Daniel, you have a particular viewpoint on a topic, you are going to consume content, news articles, whatever that may be, around that. Information is going to be pushed to support that view. Some of that information could be misinformation, but because it's all you're seeing, you're likely to believe it. So then you don't get access to contradictory information or things that go against your viewpoint. So there's a real risk that clients are going to have to sort of navigate that space, as well as sort of more strict rules that we have here in the UK and also in wider Europe.
And what's the difference between relying on third-party fact checkers versus user reporting?
Well, if we've got a user reporting, it's almost to an extent like a self-reporting thing. So let's just say there is information online, let's say about COVID, for example. We've got loads of information on the internet. Let's just say COVID never happens, it's happening now in this new sort of era, particularly in the US. There's information going on there that COVID is X, Y, and Z. And that's posted by me, not an expert in COVID. Heck, let's just say for the sake of this that I'm an anti-vaxxer. For clarity, I'm not. So I'm an anti-vaxxer. I'm pushing all of this information out there. COVID is a hoax, X, Y, and Z. That's then on you or me or somebody else to say that's misinformation, that's factually, scientifically incorrect. If we've got third-party fact-checking software platforms, their responsibility is to sift through the internet, say this is incorrect for X, Y, and Z reasons. The data suggests this, the research suggests this, the science says this. That person is wrong for this reason. It's then flagged as misinformation or it's taken down from the internet. So we're kind of going to more of a subjective process, which of course has sort of huge implications on misinformation, online safety, and a whole host of sort of other governance and regulatory issues.
And to round out the beginner level, why should law firms or businesses care about this shift, especially if it's happening in the US?
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things that, whilst we're seeing this happen specifically with Meta in the US, you might be joining a corporate commercial law firm that, whilst they're sort of based here in London, they also have clients that work out in the US. So we need to be sort of advising and encouraging clients to kind of be proactive, look at what this regulatory shift is, what information is being out there. And also it comes with so many other risks that your client could be a particular company. Let's just say it is a fossil fuel oil company, and there's information being posted around that particular client on the internet, and that information is incorrect. UK lawyers need to be sort of advising their clients to say that, okay, that information is not on sort of UK platforms or whatever, but in the US, we need to be looking at X, Y, and Z. That's defamation, that's misinformation, whatever it is, whatever's fit for that situation. We need to be making sure that clients are aware of the risks.
That's great. So that nicely rounds out the beginner level. So now that we understand the basics, let's discuss how this issue impacts businesses, particularly within the UK, where platforms like Meta face stricter regulations under frameworks like the Online Safety Bill. So could you explain how companies might be affected by this shift and what they might need for legal guidance?
Yeah, for sure. So as you kindly mentioned, Daniel, we've got the sort of online safety regulatory remit, the legislation here in the UK, and we're seeing this regulatory remit also of similar nature in the EU. We're seeing more of a shift, as we're talking about right now, in the US, with Meta sort of pushing for the sort of more free expression, relying on users to flag sort of misinformation. So clients or law firms that are operating here in the UK with clients, we've got the risk of policy misalignment in terms of how do we ensure that clients are advised accordingly to operate safely and successfully and within the regulatory parameters of these different regulatory remits. And I think just whilst we're on that point, actually, it's quite useful to flag that just from a commercial perspective, if you are looking at covering a story in one of your interviews, assessment centers that's, let's say, is focused on a different jurisdiction, that's fine to still cover, in a sense that you need to be considering how can that affect UK lawyers advising clients that operate in those jurisdictions. So I think that's a really interesting way to consider things, particularly when you're applying for training contracts, vacation schemes at international law firms. We also need to be advising clients in terms of risk mitigation. Off the back of that sort of policy misalignment is how do we advise, and what are we advising clients in terms of, in the US, if there's less of a reliance on third-party fact checkers, that could come at a increased risk from a sort of legal and reputational perspective. So what are we doing? How are we sort of mitigating potential reputational risks, particularly if misinformation is being sort of flagged all over sort of US systems that perhaps Meta own, Facebook, Instagram, whatever.
I think that's a nice follow-on point to my next question. So do you think other platforms might follow Meta's lead? And if so, what ripple effects could this have for content moderation?
I think there is a risk that this could perhaps set a precedent for other platforms. And then I think it's kind of like when there started to be considerations and conversations around the liability of internet service providers. To an extent, are they responsible for the information put up, and so forth? But I think this is slightly different in a sense that the internet service providers merely just provide access to the internet as a whole, whereas providers like Meta are actually the platform. Their policies enable this kind of misinformation, and they're opting not to use third-party fact checkers. So to an extent, I guess the responsibility does sit with them, but I do think we may see a shift in how other platforms kind of operate in terms of misinformation. And I think whilst it's not specifically on the topic of the dissemination of misinformation, from a employment kind of HR perspective, again, a lot of these law firms will also have employment arm sort of to them, is if we take a look at what Meta has done in terms of removing support for D&I policies, LGBTQ, Black communities, minority communities, and kind of just saying, to hell with that, let's get rid of it. We have seen a number of companies off the back of that, particularly US companies, kind of follow suit. So it's going to be interesting to see the impact that the removal of third-party fact checkers has on other platforms and just the internet as a whole.
And I think it's important to note within a lot of these changes have happened within such a short space of time. So the ripple effects could be massive over the long term, with especially with how quick things are progressing, like through this story. And to round out the intermediate level, what kind of risks, whether that's legal or reputational, might businesses face if they fail to adapt their content moderation strategies?
Yeah, I think I'm not a US lawyer, so I cannot really comment on the sort of the impacts of, from a legal perspective in the US. But I think if clients here in the UK are falling foul of the regulatory remits here in terms of dissemination of misinformation and the like, then of course, not only is there a reputational risk, a PR risk, there are also sort of legal sanctions that these clients may also face. So it's our role as lawyers to make sure that clients are operating within the scope of those regulatory remits, and engaging with our overseas colleagues as and when fit to ensure that the clients have the best information they can and the advice to make the decisions that are appropriate for them. Obviously, we can't tell them what decisions to make, but we can say these are the risks if you do that. This is what we suggest you do. And that's our role as lawyers, to ultimately not just provide the kind of the legal framework and say this is the law, but kind of add to that and say, so this means this could happen if you do that, or this could happen, this is the outcome if you actually opt to do that instead.
And I think those decisions quite nicely intertwine between the legal and reputational. So if a company that's been advised is found to have broken the certain like regulations or whatever, it can like have a bad look upon them, which is really important to advise them on as well.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it comes back to the point that we are more than just kind of the lawyer, the legal advisor to our clients. These are clients are looking to us to provide sort of business commercial support, and that's why understanding the impact of something that's, say, happening in the US could still impact clients sort of more broadly, and kind of doing that horizon scanning for our clients to say, oh, this is happening over here. This is what you should be thinking about.
Yeah, so like, what's it, prefacing it kind of, or
Yeah.
anticipating. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and you'll see that a lot of law firms, some of the ones that you guys are all applying to, that you're going to start your training contract at soon, Daniel, send out kind of horizon scanning, like leaflets, updates to their clients in particular sectors to say these are the key things that are happening in that sector. The AI, the tech, the data privacy, the TMT sectors of most firms will probably have published something about this. I think if you just go onto like news, search law firms, search this topic, there'll be so much more information around this topic.
Yeah, and I think that nicely moves us on to the advanced level. So this section is for those aiming to think strategically, and we'll have a look more at the long-term implications. So, Henry, how would you advise a client not only to comply with UK regulations, but to turn this challenge into a competitive advantage? And what proactive steps should they take?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest things right now is, as we touched on the two earlier stages, is the kind of working with clients, UK-based clients who operate in other markets, particularly the US, and developing their cross-border strategy. What does that look like, particularly when sort of the US standards in terms of online free speech and the standards required are going to be a lot different to that of the UK and Europe? How does that work? Is that a market we still want to be in? Probably. If so, how are we going to kind of make that work? And that kind of like ties in, with the kind of the market reputation side of things that we've spoken about, as well, just to make sure that our clients' policies are in line with that. And then also from a UK perspective, we would want to engage our kind of regulatory colleagues as well to make sure that there are likely to be some shifts in sort of viewpoints from individuals and also regulators, like what we got Ofcom and other sort of industry bodies will be looking at what's going on in the US. The internet service providers here are also going to be looking at the US. Meta in the UK may be considering how is this going to impact here in the UK. Some law firms will be acting for Meta as a client. What are we going to do around that? Does that policy actually fit here in the UK? Is that plausible? And just kind of looking at that. And also we're going to see the advancement of AI, and AI is bounded around everywhere. You guys watching will be no doubt familiar with the impact that AI is having on the legal space. But is AI going to be used for sort of content moderation for what's being posted online? Or are we going to see in the US AI just flooding the internet with loads of sort of misinformation? How can clients use AI to its advantage to ensure that it's sort of benefiting from the regulatory remits that apply in each of the various sort of jurisdictions?
I think that puts us in the direction of, so obviously within the UK you see a lot more of a kind of tightening or restriction of like these standards, whereas in the US it's a lot looser, and as you say, with companies that have got global outreach trying to balance that. How can businesses balance those needs? And then I think we'll move on to AI and such afterwards, because that's a lot to dig into.
Sure. So I think it's always been kind of the approach that the US has always, from my perspective, seen seemed a lot more kind of relaxed in a sense around sort of data and misinformation. And I think that was quite evident when we take a look at kind of the introduction of the GDPR here and then the subsequent Data Protection Act, and just trying to make sure that US, UK policies and how data could transfer in terms of like the privacy shield and everything that's kind of developed from that. But I think in terms of how clients make sure that they're kind of compliant, I think we're just going to see over time how the impact of the US kind of, because as we mentioned, it's still relatively sort of new, it's sort of hot off the press, but I think we are going to see sort of a lot of complexities around navigating these different sort of regulatory remits. But it's our role as lawyers and working with our various different teams within the firm and sort of in sort of other offices in the other jurisdictions to say, okay, this is sort of policy, this is what we need to be doing to ultimately make sure that our clients are sort of protected from risk and are aware of their sort of regulatory and legal obligations.
I think that puts us in a good position for discussing AI next, because obviously it's such a huge like driving force in this space. So with what do you believe that AI's role in such a like AI driven moderation can play in future proofing like content policies?
Yeah, I think that AI definitely has a place in a sense that it will be able to review, analyze, and moderate content in a more efficient and fast way than, if we take the US, than users can. And even if we've got third-party fact checkers, to an extent, a lot of them, if they're not already, will be using AI because, again, it's more cost efficient, it's more just efficient generally, and it's just a time saver to have an AI platform search through and flag what's misinformation and what's not. Of course, there are still going to be elements of user requirement to kind of input data and kind of support individuals and companies working. But I think that AI and clients should be investing, if they're not already, in AI initiatives to ultimately help them in this space.
And beyond compliance, how can companies use strong content moderation policies to build trust with users and regulators?
Yeah, I think firstly, the strong content policies and ensuring that they are sort of compliant with their regulatory and legal obligations is essential, because if they fall foul of that, they're going to be sanctioned. And again, if they fall foul of that and they are sanctioned, we've got PR nightmares. We've got the trust and confidence of the public, your consumers, your customers, is going to plummet. So I think that is a real risk for clients, and that's what we need to be advising them of.
And now for the position of the law firm within this, do you think that law firms should be advocating for those clients, in discussions with regulators? And if so, how do they do that, or how should they do that?
Yeah, I think we are going to see the regulators and the lawmakers and sort of the policy discussions around what's happening in the US definitely taking place. And I think it's for sure for the law firms to be kind of on the pots with this, seeing what's going on, seeing what these discussions are, seeing what any papers are being published around these conversations, and just thinking, okay, so this is down the line, as we touched on earlier, the horizon scanning. How is this going to potentially impact our clients? So say, for example, we're having this conversation now about this particular issue. There are going to be a whole host of developments, advancements, say from, let's just say your assessment center is in April. We're having this conversation now. If you keep track of this story over the next couple of weeks, months as you're preparing, there are going to be a whole host of discussions, papers, articles published around this and the impact. So as this develops, that's how we can better understand what's going on and what we need to be doing for our clients. And that's where the real value add, I think,
Yeah.
is in.
Yeah, so that's kind of the position of the firm within that to ensure not only the compliance, but that they're facing forward with that compliance and making sure that they're assessing it and tracking it over time. And I think, especially when it comes to assessment centres, if you can show that you've followed that since the early days of the story, if you will, then I think it shows a lot of the importance of how quickly things can change and how firms need to catch up with those changes very, very quickly.
100%. And I think it's a classic case with anything kind of internet-based, is that space, particularly let's take AI and all of that fun stuff, it moves so much faster in terms of like development and everything, and the law is constantly playing catch up. But then we need to be, as lawyers, telling our clients this is happening, X, Y, and Z. This is what the law says, but the law might change. So it's that constant sort of chase that we're seeing in this space.
Yeah, definitely. And before we close out the session, are there any final points upon this story in which you think we should look towards, or is there any directions that you see this going particularly?
I think it's going to be a very interesting space, and I think we're going to
Yes.
see a lot of commentary around this and the implications of this shift in direction in terms of fact checking from Meta, which I think there are some real risks with what they're doing. So I'm going to be intrigued to see how this plays out for sure.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Henry, for your time. I've learned quite a lot today, and it's as we said before, it's a ever evolving story. So, definitely keep. I'm going to definitely try and keep up to date with it as much as I can. But obviously, with how fast paced it is, that's easier said than done. But yeah, thank you for today. So, and also to those watching today, thank you for joining today's Commercial Awareness Compass. Remember, commercial awareness isn't just about following the news. It's about understanding why these developments matter to businesses and how law firms can add value by helping clients navigate them. Whether you're at the beginner, intermediate, or advanced level, keep asking yourself, how does this impact clients and how would a law firm respond? That mindset is what will set you apart in interviews and in your future career. Join us next week as we continue to build your commercial awareness. Until then, prepare without the panic. Thank you.
Cheers.